Are you ready to embark on a fall quilting journey? Join me as I dive into the world of patchwork and curves in the Sweater Weather Quilt-Along. This is Block 1 and 2 of the Sweater Weather Quilt-Along, a free quilt-along from the 9-Patch Quilt Collective, being released one block a week between now and the end of October. These 9 blocks will come together to create a lap quilt at the end of the quilt-along. The Seeing Plaid block by So Joyful Studio is a grid of 2.5-inch squares. It's a pretty classic quilt block laid out in a plaid pattern. There's half-square triangles on the corners, but otherwise it's just simple squares. After ironing and squaring up my fabric, the first thing that I have to do is cut. I thought I'd save myself some time by strip piecing. Strip piecing is a quilting technique that can both aid and challenge accuracy. This technique involves stitching long strips together before cutting them into components for quilt blocks. However, imprecise measurements during cutting, irregular strip widths, and rush sewing can lead to misaligned seams, compromising accuracy. I learned a couple of lessons about how speed and accuracy can be at odds with this block. First, I should have cut my strips the whole width of the fabric, sewed them together, pressed them open, and then cut them up. The beginning and end of strip sets tends to be where things get the most wonky. I cut my strips to exactly 7.5 inches, which covered one row each, but it meant that I actually had to throw away some of my strips once they were cut because my start or end wasn't perfect. I was trying to save fabric, but wound up needing extra cuts and extra fabric, which took more time and effort overall. Pressing is even more important when doing strip sets because they all need to nest. While I think the colors of this quilt will work out overall, they are very bold in this block. I do like the block, but I think a monochrome look would be more aesthetically pleasing. My top row isn't nearly as crisp as I usually like, so I may wind up ripping it out and re-sewing it before I assemble the quilt. This is the second block, which is Falling Leaves by Modern Moon Quilt Studio, and it was one that I was really nervous about because it has curves. I've sewn with curves in garment sewing before, but I've never pieced curves for a quilt. And you know what? It really wasn't that hard. Cutting the templates was probably the hardest part. I just got a rotating cutting mat, which I thought would be perfect for cutting curves, but I didn't really think about the fact that I would need to be stable while cutting them the full time. One of the best things that I did to get accurate leaves was to cut the shapes 1/4 of an inch from the template edges instead of relying on my cut lines on the paper. This meant that I was following along a fairly perfect 1/4 inch every time. The designer of this pattern put out a YouTube video about her process that included this tip that I'll link below. This was completely a game changer for me. I was really worried that I would wind up with wavy curves, so I used a lot of pins for this block. I expected to need to redo this at least once, but with careful pinning, I was able to get very close to perfect leaves, which was exciting for my first time doing curved piecing. Most quilters fall into one of two camps, those who always use pins and those who never use pins. I'm usually very anti-pin, but for this block it was essential. I think if I'd taken the extra time to pin my Seeing Plaid block, it would have turned out a lot crisper and cleaner. What kind of quilter are you? Are you pro-pin or are you anti-pin? Let me know in the comments below. Finally, all I had to do was sew everything up and snowball the corners on the block after trimming it to size. I was surprised that this block went way faster than the first one. These blocks are pretty big. They finish at 20 inches. There will be 9 blocks total, with the Seeing Plaid block in the middle and falling leaves in the top left. As a reminder, this Quilt Along releases a new block every week, so if you want to follow along and get caught up, you can sign up in the link in the description. Once this video is up, the 3rd block will also be available. I can't wait to tackle the next block. I'll be back with another quilting vlog in a few weeks with an update on my progress. Until then, enjoy your creative pursuits, whether it's quilting, knitting, or any other crafty hobby that you're passionate about.